There aren't many places that Marjorie Taylor Greene get put in her place. The House being one of it. One thing I can't get my head around is how Marjorie Taylor Greene feels she's even fit to be in the same building as somebody esteemed, as educated and as smart as Jamie Raskin. However, she turned up to today's House hearing on the markup of legislation and, well, Jamie Raskin just dealt with the situation presented to him.
Amendment in the nature of substitute. The clerk will please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute offered to H.R. 262 as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. The federal regulatory system is estimated to impose over $3 trillion in annual costs on the American economy. To make matters worse, federal regulators are constantly adding to this cost by pumping out thousands of new rules every year. The weight of these rules falls hard on hardworking Americans. The least the federal government can do is give fair notice of what new rules are planned, how much they are likely to cost, and when they are expected to be imposed. The federal government is already required to publish its agenda for all new rulemakings twice each year. This agenda, known as the Unified Agenda of Regulatory and Deregulatory Actions, is intended to provide the advance notice regulated parties need. In practice, however, multiple administrations have failed to publish these agendas in a timely manner. In 2012, for example, the Obama administration delayed the publication of its Unified Agenda, which was chock full of new major rules, until after the 2012 presidential election. This allowed President Obama to hide the ball from voters and deny them the opportunity to hold him accountable for these new burdens. The Biden administration has repeated the Obama playbook, failing multiple times to publish timely unified agendas, including by delaying publication until after the 2022 midterm elections. Moreover, the unified agenda has never been required to inform regulated parties in meaningful detail about how much new rules truly are expected to cost. That cost information is necessary for employers and households to plan their affairs and investments. This legislation, the ALERT Act, fixes these problems. H.R. 262 requires the federal government to publish online the information traditionally required to be included in the unified agenda, plus new specific information about how much each new rule will cost. To keep members of the public informed in real time, the bill requires this information to be updated online on a rolling monthly basis. Add, to fix the problem of administrations hiding the ball by failing to publish their agendas on time, it requires each new rule to have appeared in the online unified agenda for 6 consecutive months before it can take effect. In the digital age, this is all feasible. It's all fair, and it is, in fact, all overdue. I urge my colleagues to support this bill and the amendment that I will offer in the nature of a substitute, which conforms the text of this legislation to the text which last passed during the House during the 115th Congress. This legislation is supported by the National Federation of Independent Business. I thank Representative Good for reintroducing this important legislation. I now yield to the ranking member for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 262, the ALERT Act, is yet another attack on the regulatory protections that safeguard the health and the security of the American people and the strength of our economy. In the name of increasing transparency, ironically, the bill imposes duplicative and burdensome new reporting requirements on federal agencies that actually undermine transparency by showcasing the costs of federal regulations while hiding the corresponding benefits. This is transparently one-sided and pernicious. If, for example, we focus only on the cost of compliance with Clean Air Act rules, which is somewhere around $523 billion over a 20-year period, we miss the corresponding and obvious benefits realized for the American people, which are estimated at around $50 trillion. Committee Democrats recognize the game that's being played here. If you were to decide on whether to buy a house based only on the costs of the house and not looking at what the benefits of the house are to you, the whole world would be homeless. Committee Democrats strongly support real transparency and real clarity in the rulemaking process and must therefore oppose H.R. 262 because it would force agencies to completely distort the real meaning and the complete impact of regulations adopted by agencies. Indeed, the whole reason agencies are authorized to promulgate regulations is because of the underlying benefits which would be suppressed and hidden by this legislation. H.R. 262 would also prevent many important regulations from taking effect until OIRA has posted a slew of largely redundant information on the internet for an at least 6-month period. The Coalition for Sensible Safeguards, an alliance of more than 180 scientific, research, labor, good government, faith, community, health, environmental, and public interest groups, sent us a letter, Mr. Chairman, raising this concern. They wrote, quote, "As a result of this requirement, the benefits of critically needed regulations, whether measured in lives saved, environmental damage averted, or money saved, would be put on hold unnecessarily for 6 months or longer." I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to submit their letter to the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Another basic flaw of H.R. 262 is the fact that it doesn't provide the public with any significantly new or useful information. The reporting it requires would be generally duplicative of information made available by Executive Order 12866, which directs federal rulemaking agencies to prepare agendas of all rules under development or review. Federal agencies already meet this requirement through the semi-annual production of the Unified Agenda of Regulatory and Deregulatory Actions. OMB also provides annual reports to Congress on the costs and benefits of federal regulations pursuant to the Regulatory Right to Know Act. The bill would also force federal agencies to replicate much of the information already publicly available on regulations.gov and within narrow, unworkable implementation deadlines that would require agencies to shift limited resources away from existing workflows. We hardly do a favor for governmental efficiency and clarity by simply duplicating and multiplying the number of times that the same information has to be produced. Republicans have made no effort to address concerns that the bill threatens to curtail the ability of agencies to execute their statutory responsibilities. If they're interested in real solutions to advance the transparency and effectiveness of federal regulations, I encourage them to engage with the Biden administration's ongoing work to modernize the regulatory process. As it is, they appear more concerned with regulating Americans' individual rights and freedoms, inserting themselves into the private lives of women and their health care and their pregnancies, making it harder for Americans to exercise their right to vote, and banning books and fact-based curricula from schools and libraries. I urge my colleagues to oppose these efforts to curtail the freedoms of Americans and to oppose this bill, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes, I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter of support for the ALERT Act from the National Small Business Association into the record. Without objection, so ordered. Chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Agencies already list a rule's potential benefits in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or the NPRM. Under the ALERT Act, industries, employers, employees, manufacturers, and stakeholders affected by a proposed rule would have a clearer idea of the potential cost of a rule compliance with the necessary lead time to address it. If agencies are promulgating standards that require billions of dollars in compliance costs, it's only fair that those who have to foot the bill for these costs are given time to adjust for these new requirements. Agencies also should be granting the public ample notice to respond to rules that could cost the economy billions of dollars. Under the Regulatory Flexibility Act and Executive Order 12866, agencies are required to post their regulatory plans in April and October in what commonly is referred to as the Unified Agenda. However, there are no effective means to enforce timely publication. For example, President Obama published the Unified Agenda for 2012 in December, conveniently after the November elections. The Biden administration has failed to meet its own deadlines multiple times. The ALERT Act provides a solution for these demonstrated administrative failures by tying federal regulatory action to transparency. You know, we put so many onerous regulations on small business or businesses across this country, and the federal government has no idea what it does to comply, and they don't comply. And so we have got to have some lead time in order to see how these affect our economy, see how they affect businesses. We ought to be rewarding businesses, not hampering them. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish to speak on the bill? The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor of the good bill signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Next page. The question is now on favorably reporting H.R. 262 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Cosar.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is ordered. As previously announced, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 5798, the Protecting Our Nation's Capital Emergency Act of 2023. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 5798, the Protecting Our Nation's Capital Emergency Act of 2023, a bill to restore the right to negotiate matters pertaining to the discipline of law enforcement officers of the District of Columbia through collective bargaining, to restore the statute of limitations for bringing disciplinary cases against members or civilian employees of the Metropolitan Police Department of the District of Columbia.
Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of substitute. The clerk will please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5798 as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. The men and women of the Metropolitan Police Department serve their community every day to keep the district safe and secure. In doing so, the department routinely places themselves in dangerous situations to protect others. And yet, progressive policies from the Washington, D.C. Council continue to hamstring district police officers and needlessly place them in unsafe situations. On January 4th, 2023, the D.C. Council passed the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act of 2022. The act targeted D.C. police officers, taking away employee protections and making their jobs more difficult, despite rising crime in the district. When the D.C. Council passed this law, Congress acted swiftly and in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion to overturn it. The House and Senate passed H.J. Resolution 42, which would have overturned the entire D.C. law. President Biden, however, vetoed Congress's legislation allowing the harmful policies of the D.C. Council to remain in effect today. This bill, Protecting Our Nation's Capital Emergency Act, repeals certain provisions of the D.C. law, restoring D.C. police officers' right to collectively bargain over disciplinary matters and restoring clear timelines for disciplinary investigations. H.R. 5798 also repeals the D.C. Council's requirement that the time and place of some adverse action hearings be posted to a public website. This public posting requirement would allow activists to harass officers attempting to pursue their due process in the workplace. This legislation is necessary to ensure the Metropolitan Police Department's recruitment and retention. The D.C. Police Force has lost over 1,200 members since 2020, and staffing levels remain the lowest they've been in the last 50 years. Meanwhile, violent crime is rising in Washington, D.C. From 2022 to 2023, all crime increased by 30%. Homicides increased by 35%. Violent crime increased by 39%. Robberies rose by 67%. Motor vehicle thefts increased by a staggering 82%. And the statistics from January of this year provide little hope that this trend will change. D.C. cannot lose another police officer during this crisis. My Republican colleagues recognize the importance of supporting the law enforcement officers who risk their lives to protect our communities. By restoring basic employee protections, this legislation shows Metropolitan Police Department officers the respect they deserve. Everyone should feel safe in their capital city. I'm proud to support this bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. I now yield to the ranking member for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the dangerous and unsafe situations that Metropolitan Police Department officers have been thrust into was defending the Congress of the United States and the Vice President against a rampaging mob of insurrectionists on January 6, 2021, chanting "Hang Mike Pence" and wounding or hospitalizing more than 140 officers, both from the Capitol Force and from the MPD. I remember one of the MPD officers who came to help out that day, Michael Fanone, wasn't even on duty, but just heard about what was going on and came down to join the forces defending our democracy. Now we're here on the Protecting Our Nation's Capital Act, and I do want to start by thanking our colleagues for at least spelling capital in the title with an A and not an O, a decision which saves us from completely destroying the laugh meter this week. But there's enough irony in the contents of this bill. Of everything we could be doing to reduce criminal violence and protect citizens in our nation's capital, the GOP wants to make it harder for the chief of the D.C. police to fire or discipline police officers who themselves commit serious crimes or engage in official misconduct. You heard me right. Their big anti-crime initiative for the city where we work is to make it easier for lawbreakers to remain on the D.C. police force. Apparently, nothing screams public safety louder to our colleagues than pinning badges on the chests of crooked cops. Look, we could be having a hearing today on passing a nationwide universal background check on violent criminals for gun purchases, a measure that would save hundreds or thousands of American lives and is favored by more than 90% of Americans of every political persuasion and is supported by the Major Cities Chiefs Association. But the NRA-operated GOP won't allow that. We could be having a hearing on a federal ban on military-style assault weapons, including the mass shooter's weapon of choice, the AR-15, last used at massacres at a Texas mall, a Tennessee school, and a Kentucky bank. But this ban, too, is favored by the vast majority of Americans, including Washingtonians, but the NRA won't allow us to have a hearing on that. Instead, we're studying an obscure bill to allow union-busting Republicans who oppose collective bargaining in general to suddenly strike the pose of defenders of unions as they seek to override and crush a law passed in someone else's community. And why are we doing this, you reasonably ask? Well, the answer is plain. The local police officers union, which could not otherwise override the majority will of D.C. voters, is demanding it. They failed to persuade a majority on the 13-member Council of the District of Columbia of their position. Their legal challenges were rejected in court. They tried and failed to have their way through a congressional disapproval resolution, and thus far they failed to expand collective bargaining protections for officers found guilty of misconduct through the congressional appropriations process. So this is take 5 for this project. Republicans won't take yes for an answer on a strong bipartisan immigration package coming from the Senate, which would solve the problems at the border they've been bewailing and bemoaning all year, but they won't take no for an answer when it comes to overriding a D.C. law to strip the power of the local chief of police to regulate discipline on his own police force, an issue which the vast majority of Americans have never even heard of. Now, if I were a member of the D.C. Council, which I'm not, I have no idea how I would vote on this question, but I'm sure I would sit through many hours of witness testimony analyzing it, and I would interact with thousands of constituents about it, which D.C. Council members did. I would talk to the union, and I certainly would want to talk to the chief of the D.C. Police Department. My colleagues will forgive me if I say we don't know the first thing about the legislative merits or demerits of this issue in the District of Columbia. We've never gone out to the 8 wards of Washington, D.C. to hear from the people affected by it. The only thing we really know is the last 4 chiefs of police in Washington, Charles Ramsey, Kathy Lanier, Peter Newsham, Robert Conti, have all argued strenuously that they need the authority to discipline officers who commit crimes or engage in corrupt actions in order to maintain good morale on the police force and preserve the trust and loyalty of the vast majority of good cops and the rest of the community as well. We know that 12 of the 13 council members in D.C. agree with those police chiefs because they sent us a letter yesterday, Mr. Chairman, which you and I received, citing to a D.C. auditor report which cataloged numerous cases where officers in the Metropolitan Police Department were convicted of activities like sexual assault, domestic violence against their wives or partners, officers who were arrested for assorted criminal activity, who gave false statements on the stand, who misused their issued firearms, who slept on the job, and so on. Every MPD chief for the last 15 years has supported the law as it stands because it empowers police leadership, not a third party, to determine the appropriate standards of conduct and discipline for their offers. So H.R. 5798 is a shocking assault on local democracy, which has made itself clear where it stands on this question. It marks a new low in the appalling efforts to override local government in Washington and micromanage the affairs of the people of D.C. This bill would do one thing and one thing only. It would overthrow the internal disciplinary procedures for police misconduct. If anything, it will make criminal matters worse in Washington, D.C. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge us to reject this misguided legislation, and I will yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Before I recognize Ms. Greene from Georgia, I would like to ask unanimous consent to add to the record letters of support for H.R. 5798 from the following organizations: the D.C. Police Union, Fullerton Police Officers Association, Las Vegas Police Protective Association, Panoma Police Officers Association, Public Safety Alliance of Nevada, San Jose Police Officers Association, Sergeants Benevolent Association, the United Coalition of Public Safety, and the Fraternal Order of Police.
Mr. Chairman, I have no objection to your introducing that, but is there written testimony or analysis by the Las Vegas and Pomona and these other jurisdictions which have suddenly taken an interest in Washington, D.C.
These are
affairs?
letters of support for H.R. 5798.
But written by those individual unions, is that it?
We'll be happy to give you a copy, right?
Okay, thank you. Then I have no objection. Okay.
Without objection, letters will be entered into the record. Chair now recognizes Ms. Greene from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to express in the strongest words possible that I support the police, and we should be supporting the police here in our nation's capital because it's our nation's capital that has one of the highest murder rates in our country, one of the worst crime records in our nation's history, and is an absolute embarrassment to our country. I'd also like to remind everyone that one of our own colleagues was carjacked months ago here in Washington, D.C. We also just had a former Trump admin official die because he was shot here in our nation's capital. And many Hill staffers themselves have been attacked just walking the city streets. This is an ongoing crime epidemic here in our nation's capital, and it's appalling. We should be supporting police officers, not attacking Americans' gun rights, while all of us walk around under the protection of good guys with guns. Capitol Police carry those AR-15s and guard all of us, but yet Democrats would love to take away the gun rights of American citizens and blame guns that never get up by themselves and shoot people. Murder is already a crime. People kill people, and they don't just kill them with guns. They kill them with knives. They kill them with fists. They kill them with objects. They strangle them. But yet I just listened to one of my colleagues say that we need to disarm Americans in order to somehow stop crime in Washington, D.C. We should
Will the gentlelady yield?
No, I will not. We should be protecting and supporting police officers. I also heard President Trump come under attack once again because Democrats have nothing else to say to defend their own policies but attack President Trump. I'd like to remind everyone that it was Antifa, BLM, by the way, supported by Democrats. BLM as an organization raised millions and millions of dollars on Act Blue, the Democrat fundraising site. And then BLM riots across America that were endorsed heavily by Democrats and apologized and said mostly peaceful protests by media who are totally defending Democrats constantly. These riots caused $2 billion in damage across America. I'd also like to remind everyone that in 2017, when President Trump was inaugurated, that rioters nearly burned down Washington, D.C. That's right, nearly burned down the city here. But oh, we've got to attack President Trump every single day. You know, it was also Democrats that said things like, I don't know why there aren't uprisings everywhere. That was our former Speaker of the House. Our current Vice President, before the election of 2020, said, we will not stop. We won't stop, talking about these BLM riots. Also, one of our Democrat colleagues is on video. By the way, all of this is on video, their statements. And she was talking about Trump supporters, and she said, when you see them, you make a crowd, surround them wherever they are. These are the statements that come from our Democrat colleagues, but they want to attack President Trump every single day and take away police officers' ability to stop criminals and arrest criminals and protect our city streets, our community streets, and our nation's capital. And I'm sick and tired of it. It is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to say I support the amendment that you just spoke on and introduced. And I would urge my colleagues to pay attention very carefully. The American people are paying attention, and they're not stupid. Just because you have a little microphone you can talk in doesn't mean that you can sit here and lie to the American people every single day. They can read the crime statistics. We all know you can't walk around this city without being in danger of being robbed or carjacked or murdered maybe. My goodness, how horrible is that? So let's support our police officers. Let's vote for good things to help citizens in this city. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Will the gentlelady yield for a question?
No, I will not yield to one of your stupid questions that are always attacking me and attacking President Trump.
How about a mediocre
question? No, I don't
question?
want to. I do not want
An
your
excellent question?
No.
A smart question?
No, my time.
An intelligent question?
You have no smart or intelligent questions.
Chair now recognizing Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you. That was a lot. I want to remind the